She says, one day I went to pick him up, and he invited me inside. He took me to his room, and I saw that he slept on a tattered mattress on the floor with a sheet thrown over it. The floor was covered with a super thick carpet that looked like it had never been vacuumed. Me, I could post up in some projects in Baltimore, but Pac's house, not so much. Pac's living space made the projects feel like the Four Seasons. She says that after he grabbed what he needed, he took her to meet his mother, who was nodding off in the corner of a dark room. But there was a dismissiveness to his mother that she was somehow really intrigued by, and she felt sort of drawn to it. She says she doesn't know why, and I'm like, I know why, because you are self-consumed, and this was a person who wasn't willing to give you attention. Hey, how are you? Welcome to another episode of Worthy. We are in chapter 5. She calls chapter 5 advanced degree. And if you were here with us last time, she's talking about an advanced degree from the University of the Be More Streets. That would be Baltimore, so this is where we've entered into her gangsta lifestyle. Okay, so this is where she wants to let us know that she was real drug dealer. In fact, she's what you would call a queen pin slinging dope. The end of last chapter, she introduced us to a pivotal character in her life by the name of Tupac. Now, I assumed when she decided to call him Pac that was a nickname of her own making, just like when she wanted to call ayahuasca Aya. It's like, okay, could you spare us, Jada? We can only take so much at once. But apparently, that was his nickname. So I was wrong, and my apologies. But I tell you what I'm not wrong about. I'm not wrong about the fact that this book is way worse than Spare ever was. It could be maybe that I just cared more about Harry's story, but Jada just drags everything out so much. And she tells you so many details you don't care to hear. And she just tells you all sorts of things that aren't worthy of having been told. No, Jada, it's not worthy. It's annoying because with Harry, you wanted more. You're just like, okay, wait. I feel like you're like, wait, what? Tell me a little bit more about that time when you were a kid. Like, wait, what? What's happening? He was really just hop skipping around because he couldn't remember anything. Remember how many times? I don't remember. If only Jada couldn't remember. She just remembers too much. And she apparently had no editor. Nobody was like, well, we can cut that story. It's not really relevant. Okay, you're really dragging here on the 16th friend you're telling us about. You spent 1.5 pages on each of your friends, and we're at friend 16 now. The audience might have lost interest, 15 friends back. So anyway, this chapter is going to be stones skipping over the sewer. Okay, we're just going to be hitting the high points. And those high points would be her relationship to Tupac and her relationship to this boyfriend that she had. And the reason they broke up is interesting. Very odd, I think. I think her reasoning for breaking up with him is very odd. And yet she has nothing to say about how strange it is. Y'all, you be the judge, okay? Stick with me until we can get to that point, because I really want to know. Do you guys find the reason for her breakup to be as strange as I do? Because she really builds this guy up. She thinks he is so special and so unique and so awesome and so wonderful and so blah, blah, blah. And then the reason she breaks up with him is so pithy and unimportant. And so made up. No, that's what it is. It's not that it's an unimportant reason to break up with somebody. It's such a made up reason to break up with somebody. I was floored. I was floored that even she couldn't be like, it wasn't a great reason. No, she, to this day, feels like it's completely valid. And in fact, I think she feels like it makes her very deep. And you will be shocked by how shallow it is. Okay, so also in this chapter, she wants to talk a lot about her advancing lifestyle in the drug scene. She's got a lot of excuses as to why you've never heard about her drug behavior, and you've never heard about how she was slinging dope in the streets of Bmore. Her excuses are flimsy, but many. And so, I'll let you be the judge of whether you think this is true or not. All right. So though this chapter is one of the longest chapters we have looked at together, this won't be one of the longest episodes because there's just so much drivel between the high points. Okay, so we're not going to be reading every single page. I read every single page. I'm not going to subject you to that. She starts off the chapter by saying that she and Tupac had this incredible bond. Like, they could just totally tell each other everything. There was no pretense, just, hanging around, telling each other everything. They could, joke together, laugh together, make fun of each other. It was like the most relaxing relationship of all time. And it was so deep and so intimate that she felt like it should be romantic. And yet they just couldn't seem to make it past the physical hurdle. She says that he was not the looker he was later on in life. So maybe that was something to do with it. Didn't have those, as she would say, sculpted features of his later life. He was still a little bit gangly, a little awkward. But their emotional bond was such that both of them felt that they should also have a physical bond, a romantic relationship. So she starts this chapter out by saying that one time they tried to broach the subject. The one time they tried to have this back and forth. She says Tupac initiated it. She starts the chapter out by saying they were both trying to figure themselves out and figure out what sort of relationship it was that they had. Later on, she tries to say that it was really Tupac who pushed her into kissing so they could see what it was like, And of course, she poo-pooed the whole thing. I mean, she knew it would never work. They were like brother and sister, but okay, fine, if you want to. So she says they tried kissing each other. And she said that the kiss lasted a few seconds before we both pulled away in mutual disgust. It felt wrong. Pac pulled away with his eyes all squinted as if he'd drunk spoiled milk. He wiped his lips hard and said, "What the F?" I laughed my ass off. "See, I told you, dummy." It was literally like a sister and brother trying to make out. All I knew, though, was that it was possible to really love a guy deeply without it having anything to do with sexual attraction. I never felt that before. Pac made up for the lack of male protection and care I sought in my life. Unlike other guys who wanted to flash their jewels, cars, cash as their value, Pac didn't have any of those things to display his worth. His mind was what he offered, his care and his attention. Besides, I think God knew that if sexual attraction had been possible between us, we would have left each other in a special kind of ruin. Instead, God gifted us with a special kind of relationship. She goes on to say that they were super close, but they also knew which buttons to push on each other, and they could really make each other crazy mad. She said we both had fiery, passionate, and dangerously stubborn personalities. This made it for feral fights. We didn't take each other's shit, and unfortunately, also knew how to hurt each other, like no other. Our tongues were the sharpest of swords between us. These fights could leave us not speaking for days, sometimes weeks at a time. But we always made it back. Always. Interesting. I really don't know much at all about the supposed relationship between the two of them, except for the fact that she exaggerates it quite a bit. And it would seem that perhaps she is misremembering how close they were, because nobody else seems to recall this. But, who knows? Like maybe back in the day, they really were just super tight. I don't know. But it seems like once he ends up moving away from Baltimore, maybe the closeness of this bond isn't quite it all was. She says that nobody could tease her like Pac. He knew how to get under my skin. He created a nickname to remind me that I wasn't as up on my game as I acted. It was brutal. He called me Square for life. Then she goes on to share details about Tupac's life that I feel like aren't hers to share. This is her story, and of course he's going to get intermingled into it, having, unfortunately run into her at a young age, and they were friends, supposedly. But just because somebody is in your sphere doesn't mean you get to tell their story. Now, of course, he's dead, so he can't tell his own story, but it just feels like a kind of an invasion of his privacy. He talks about how poor Tupac was. She says Pac couldn't hide the reality of poverty in his life. Looking for an easier way of life, in part, his mom had brought him and his little sis from New York to Baltimore, but it didn't sound like their lives had gotten much easier for them. Now, I have no knowledge of Tupac's growing up years at all. Big shocker there. But I have read in the comments that people said that Tupac came from some money of his own. Now, as the chapter will go on, we'll find that he finds a place to live that is on the nicer side of town for a variety of reasons. And it has nothing to do with the fact that his mother had money. It has nothing to do with the fact that his family was able to offer him anything. And we'll get to where he moves and why later. So I'm not sure quite what to do with this. For right now, I'm going to believe that he had a rough time of it. Maybe why people say that he didn't grow up poor is because he didn't live in the poor part of town forever. I don't know. Anyway, to keep the story going, she says that Pac had a mother who was struggling with severe addiction, and that his environment was full of instability and chaos. She said they really bonded over the fact that neither one of them could rely on their mothers because of addiction. But unfortunately, Tupac's mom had not managed to secure work in the same way that Adrian did. You remember, somehow, beyond all odds, Adrian is still working as a registered nurse at a hospital on the night shift. I have no idea what was the deal with that hospital. Adrian was a very clear and obviously raging heroin addict, so the hospital must have just been super short-staffed to have kept her on. Regardless, Jada was the recipient of a mother who had at least a way of earning a living so that there was always food on the table. Not so for Tupac and his sister. Jada says that though Tupac never said so, she couldn't really tell if he ever got 3 meals a day. And she definitely knew that he didn't always have shoes that fit and he wasn't always getting a good night's sleep. She says, between my regular jobs and cash I'd started to make in the streets, I always had some money in my pockets. To help Pac, I made it my business to ensure he was straight, but not on some charity shit. Pac was prideful. He had standards about what it meant to be a man and stood his ground on that, in spite of how he may have been suffering. If he was made to feel like I thought he needed assistance, he would refuse support from me. And in those instances, my heart withered watching him do so. Now, this is meant as no stab at Tupac, but this girl, Jada, has managed to secure multiple jobs at once, and I'm like legitimate jobs. She has several jobs at like different clothing stores, and then also she, is making this side living on the streets. Now, you all know how I feel about her mingling with this side job on the streets, but she's got cash flow. She's not wondering if she's going to be able to afford the sneakers she wants. She's not wondering what she's going to eat. She's not like, oh, I can't go out to eat, I don't have enough money. None of this. And I'm just wondering, why is it that Tupac has not found regular employment? If his standards as a man are that he needs to provide for himself and also his mother and his sister, and those were his standards, we discuss it a couple of times in this chapter, why then was he not finding a way to provide for his family in any meaningful way? I know he's a child, he's 15 years old, but Jada knew that if she wanted some financial independence, she was going to have to figure that one out on her own. If she was going to have any kind of freedom, money was going to have to be her first priority. So she went and got multiple legitimate jobs. Why was Tupac not doing that? And why is she feeling the need to provide for her male friend? Why is he also not seeing 2 + 2 = 4? If I'm poor, I get a job. If I don't have, I go get. I'm just wondering what the situation was there. She says she devised all sorts of ways to keep him in clothes. And one of the ways she would do this is, she would go shopping for herself, but she'd also pick him up some things. She would just bring them to school and, she'd show him what she had been purchasing. And she'd be like, oh yeah, and I got you some stuff too, because when I was shopping, I saw this and you look so good in it. And I couldn't help myself. Oh, sorry, I had to buy it for you. And, she'd hold up the jacket to him and be like, see, I knew that would look so good on you. And he'd really like what she picked out. And so, he'd get this big smile on his face and be like, yo, you're not such a square after all. This is dope. And he'd throw on the jacket and he'd be all proud of it. And it was more like a sister buying clothes for her brother. It wasn't a charity case. She continually was able to sell him on the idea of like, oh, I was getting something for myself and I just picked you up something, She says that, whenever she could, she'd take him out to eat, wherever she was eating. And sometimes, it was just TGI Fridays, or, she'd go and get a chicken box or a cheese steak sub, or she'd go to McDonald's and she'd make sure that he came with her when she went to Denny's and IHOP and all that sort of thing. But occasionally she'd go out with her rich friends from the streets. Later on, when I started to really roll in the streets and was flush with cash, I even took Pac a few times when I went with my homegirl Fawn, Chet, and some other high-rolling hustlers to full-on upscale dinners at Pargo's, our spot for a, quote, good week. I'm talking about at least a couple of grand in my pocket. For the other players, it was a lot more. I didn't bring Pac around often because I didn't want to pull him into the dangers of the Baltimore dope scene. The gang wasn't for you if you weren't from Baltimore and didn't have your people. I wasn't thorough like that to have him on my hip. Me, I could barely cover my own ass. Oh, that's part of the reason why this book is so hard to read. What is this? But here we have one of the first excuses that she wants to give us as to why you've never heard about any of this. Tupac, if he were still alive, would be like, Jada was rolling in the streets with the hustlers. you know. And of course, her excuse would be, well, I mean, I didn't bring him around because I had to protect him from the Baltimore drug scene. Tupac couldn't handle himself. He couldn't. Well, maybe he couldn't. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, what are you talking about? I don't think you needed to protect this man from your lifestyle choices, you know. But again and again and again, she'll tell us, well, the reason that people don't really know is because I would do it in secret, you know. I was just really secretive about it all. I just had to do these things, and I didn't really bring the people I loved into it because, you know, it's rough times, rough street, rough life. She said that the problem for Tupac was that he just had such an it factor that all of the people on his street didn't trust him, and they felt threatened by him. So she said he constantly had issues on his own block because he had this it factor. She said the other dudes selling dope already saw him as a threat, so she wasn't willing to bring him around with her friends lest he have one more spot where he couldn't feel comfortable. She says the thing is, though, Pac didn't pay their foolishness any mind. He was focused and becoming known for his brazen rap battles. At 15 and 16, he could freestyle and rhyme you relentlessly into submission. We were each other's biggest fans, going crazy watching each other do what we loved. I loved watching him do rap battles, and he got a kick watching my dance battles. Then there came the inevitable moment when Pac tried to convince me, you should rap. You'd be dope, Jada. So she's like, I don't know, Pac. And then he writes her a rhyme, and then, you know, she can't get the cadence. And then he'd do it, and then she tried to copy, and she couldn't. He'd make fun of her for having, like, white relatives or something. Maybe that's why she couldn't do it, blah, 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 blah. You know, but of course, when she enters a rap battle, lo and behold, Jada wins. Even though she can't rap, but somehow she manages it. Who saw it going any different way? She says that they really leaned on each other when it came to both of them in their separate romantic lives. They would confide in each other. They would help each other. You know, I'll carry this message to so-and-so for you. If you'll do this for me, can you explain? Can you go tell so-and-so I like them? Da, 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 da. She says that Tupac he just loved love. He was always falling for somebody or other. But she had eyes for only one man. And this was a guy named John Cole. He was a visual artist at her school. He wasn't on campus all that much. She says, whenever I saw him, I had butterflies. I was so infatuated with him that instead of just introducing myself, I asked two friends to make the introduction in the lunchroom one day. She says that he kept to himself and his art most of the time. And she could feel in him that he was a real softy, but he had just such this tortured heart. Steer clear, girls. They have a tortured heart for a reason. But what really was surprising to me was the way she described young John Cole. She says, I liked black dudes, street dudes to be correct. And John Cole was neither, the exact opposite. He was pale white, with white blonde hair all over. Not yellow blonde, but white. To some, he could seem damn near transparent. But in my eyes, he was beautifully handsome. His face and body seemed sculpted. His face and body seemed sculpted like one of those classic Greek statues. He was different, and I was captivated. Seems different. Maybe he's a vampire. She says that she made Pac get to know him first, because she said, he's different, and I like that, but I want to make sure he's not on some weird out-of-pocket shit. Well, apparently he wasn't, and well, actually, he was into some weird stuff, but I guess nothing that was too weird for Jada. She says that Tupac got to know John and they became great friends. And then she was included into the fold, and they were just like the three musketeers. She said the only thing I tried to separate was my street life, not wanting to involve either of them in what was still a limited scale at this time. I didn't want my worlds to collide. Again, that's why nobody knows anything about this second life I had, you know. My first very serious teenage relationship, that guy knew nothing about it. And Tupac didn't know anything about it. But that's because I had to keep my world separate. You know, God forbid they collide. So she goes on to talk about how different John's life was from Tupac's life. So these are the two most important men in her life right now. John's her boyfriend, Tupac's her friend. John was living the upscale life in a very nice house, you know, great accommodations. John was not hurting. Tupac, on the other hand, was the exact and perfect opposite. And she goes on to tell us about Tupac's living environment. And this is again where I say, Where's the line between what you can share and what you can share from a friend? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, Tupac is not with us, so maybe it's okay for her to say this, because what's it going to do? Harm his reputation? But and it's not his fault that he had to live like this. It's just very personal details. It's very intimate what she decides to share about his living situation. And I just don't know. I just don't know if it was hers to share. She says that a couple of times he let her into his house. And quite frankly, if this was a person's living environment, they would have to trust you so much to let you see what it was really like. So for the fact that he let her in a couple of times means that he trusted her implicitly. So for her to reveal to everybody else what his life was like seems like a breaking of that trust, even if he has passed away. My personal opinion, but that's what I think. One day I went to pick him up and he invited me inside. He took me to his room and I saw that he slept on a tattered mattress on the floor with a sheet thrown over it. The floor was covered with a super thick carpet that looked like it had never been vacuumed. Me, I could post up in some projects in Baltimore, but Pac's house, not so much. Pac's living space made the projects feel like the Four Seasons. She says that after he grabbed what he needed, he took her to meet his mother, who was nodding off in the corner of a dark room. She says that over time she got to know his mother a little bit, and she saw that many of Tupac's traits were inherited from her. Afeni was brilliant, well-learned, and when she had her mindset, there was no changing it. She had a smile that could light up a room, and when she started to speak about something she was passionate about, it was impossible for her not to get your attention. And Pac was the same way. But there was a dismissiveness to his mother that she was somehow really intrigued by, and she felt sort of drawn to it. She says she doesn't know why, and I'm like, I know why, because you are self-consumed, and this was a person who wasn't willing to give you attention. She says that Pac introduced her and said, "Ma, this is my friend Jada from school." Afeni, who sat smoking quietly as the embers of her cigarette lit up the darkness, said, "Well, hello, Jada, aren't you pretty?" She said this without celebration, as just a matter of fact. And I don't know how to explain it, but I was immediately drawn to her rawness and her lack of desire to be impressed, or to impress. "Thank you, it's very nice to meet you," said Jada. "You too, sweetheart." Afeni then turned her attention somewhere else. She says that she didn't really go to Pac's house that much after that. It's kind of a weird scene. Bad vibes. John, however, went and hung out with Tupac multiple times, and even stayed the night, but it got a little uncomfortable when the rats got a little too close for comfort to the mattress on the floor of Pac's room, so John stopped spending the night. But the issue was that not only was it a bad environment to have any friends over, it was just a bad environment to live in, and Tupac couldn't handle it after a while, and he got into a fight with his mom, and he needed somewhere to go. So Jada begged her mom, "Please let Tupac stay here, just let him spend the night, please, 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 please." And her mom, who felt that it was very inappropriate for Jay to have a male friend in the house, even though he's sleeping on the couch, said, "Okay, but only for one night." As a side note, isn't it funny what morals people choose to cling to when they're living an immoral lifestyle? Like, here she is, completely high all the time, can't really take care of her daughter, isn't really doing right by the things she needs to, but she wants to cling to the ideal that a young girl should not have a male friend in the house at night. It's one of those things that people do, and I'm not picking on Jada's mom. I'm just saying, as a whole, as humanity goes, it's interesting when you've thrown all caution to the wind, you choose to cling to a couple of moral codes just to prove to yourself, I still have a moral compass. I still know right from wrong, But it's like, well, the compass is pretty broken. You've chosen a few things to still cling to, but it's just always interesting what lines people will draw. Well, this was the line for Jada's mom. No boys in the house. So Pac got to sleep on the sofa one time. But then after that, they had to find somewhere else for him to go. And the obvious person to reach out to was John, the boyfriend and best friend. So John goes and asks his dad, can Tupac stay here? And Tupac began to live with John. Now, John lived in a great place. And they were completely fine, John's parents, with Tupac staying there, and eventually John's house became his permanent address. So that may be why people say that Tupac was not doing poorly, because eventually he did find himself a permanent address in a nice part of town. But it certainly doesn't sound like he came from money, and just because he was living there doesn't mean he was now suddenly flush with cash. She said that John's mom was alive but not really present. She'd had a really debilitating stroke. And so I'm not really sure who was looking out for John and Tupac when they were at the house. Maybe the dad played a really integral role there, making sure they were doing what needed to be done. But in a way, the three of them are really bonded because of their lack of a mother in their lives. She said that one of the things that John introduced her to was mushrooms, and she had a couple of trips with him. She almost poisoned herself, she says, by taking too many. I don't know if it's possible to poison yourself with mushrooms. I've heard it's not, but I'm sure she did have one hell of a ride. She said that he was a seasoned enthusiast, and a lot of his artwork was inspired by these journeys he would take. Then she goes into a long diatribe about the fact that one of the things that, while she's learning about shrooms from John, Tupac is teaching her about politics. Tupac related to the world as the son of a former member of the Black Panthers. And so a lot of times when they're sitting together, he would be delivering these real fiery sermons about the plight of the Black man in America, and how the entire system was rigged against them, and how they were always going to be under the boot of the oppressor, and that they needed to rise up, and that white people were just going to always be a problem for them. She said that this was, interesting news to her because she had learned about civil rights from her grandmother. And she'd seen her Aunt Karen and her mom Adrienne have a different take on racial reconciliation and the situation of race in America, because they too ascribed to the philosophies of the Black Panther Party. But to hear Tupac sort of stitch these two worlds together, sort of fill in the cracks for her, it was quite an education. And it really influenced the way she began to see the world. One point that she and Tupac never agreed on was the fact that she said that the Black Panther movement didn't make any room for Black women. It was about advancing Black men, and Black women were supposed to just stand behind and cheer the Black men on. But she said she'd always had a problem with that. And Tupac could never be reconciled with the fact that she said Black women needed the same rights as Black men under the movement, though they were not given a place in the movement. She said, in my own studies, I noted that there were still gaps in the thinking of both movements that held Black women back, because we were ultimately expected to propel Black men forward. Pac and I had many intense and powerful debates about sexism within the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and the ridiculousness of how Black men, in fighting for their freedom and autonomy, had a very difficult time believing their women deserved the same freedom and autonomy. This was always deeply disappointing to me, and Pac and I would go at it around this issue. She says Pac loved women, especially Black women, but for some reason he couldn't just not see that she was right about this. She said that Tupac was a lot better of a debater than her in this subject, that he had thought about it a lot more than her, so he could really shut her down. But she also held her own, and she was proud to let you know that she was able to silence him a few times. However, all of this newfound racial awareness around racism made her start seeing the world in a different way. Those are her words, not mine. Okay, she says, one day John and I were out shopping in a store when I realized, in my newfound racial awareness around racism, that a white female clerk had been eyeing me and covertly following me. So she goes on to tell the tale as old as time. She says that she approached the clerk and said, "Are you following me?" "Excuse me?" "I said, are you effing following me?" John immediately ran to my side, smoothed things out, and took me outside the store. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked gently. "You didn't see how she was treating me. She was following me like I was going to steal something. How come she didn't do that to you?" "Why do you think she's following you?" "'Cause I'm Black, John." John listened silently, but with the deepest empathy. When I was done ranting, he said, "I get it. I'm sorry you experienced that, and I wish you didn't have to." He was so kind, but what we both knew then was that he would never have such experiences. No matter how hard we tried to understand, I knew this would create a chasm between us. That made me question if I could truly consider white men as romantic partners. It was bad enough that most Black men didn't understand the plight of Black women, but to contend with a white man who wouldn't have the ability to get it no matter how hard he tried, which was worse? Okay. You'll know I'm going to have to pump the brakes on this. Jada had gone through the world being able to just go in a store and not even care because she wasn't looking for it. But you're going to find what you're looking for, right? Now Jada has been told by Tupac, all the white people are out to get you and they all think that you're a thug anyway. So you better watch out because since they already believe that about you, they're going to treat you as though that's already what you are. So now she goes into the store and she perceives that this one woman is coming after her. Notice how quickly she escalated that. She's cursing at the woman the second sentence that comes out of her mouth. That's not how she used to carry herself in the world. She'd just go about her business, you know? And if that white clerk wants to be so low down as to judge Jada, that's the white clerk's problem. That's not Jada's problem. And, you know, hitherto, never had she had all these issues with the clerks. But now that she knows that there's going to be a problem between her and the white people, now she's all ready for a fight. You know, how much of an education was this that Tupac gave her? Because now it's going to be harder to move it in and out of the world. When she wasn't looking for it, she didn't find it, she could be at peace. Isn't that better than to always assume that everyone's after you? And even if that woman was, what of it? That's that lady's problem, you know? But my greater issue with this is, so even if this did happen, and it totally stinks that there would be people there who would just judge you because of the color of your skin. Even if that is 100% legitimate story, there was a clerk who was watching her and who was even covertly following her. Even if that's true, that's super lame that had to happen. But her boyfriend was really, really kind about it. And he didn't see it, but he was willing to believe you that it had happened and was empathetic about it and was kind about it. John had never failed before as a boyfriend. Never before had she thought, John and I will never understand each other because he's white and I'm black. That had never been the issue. She'd seen John, thought he was beautiful, wanted to be with him. Up until this point, the only time that she was ever concerned was she didn't want to necessarily drag him into the street life that she was involved in. Probably a good idea, you know. But other than that, the color of his skin had not bothered her. Now suddenly, even though nothing in the relationship to this point has shown her that he, on a cellular level, cannot understand her, now suddenly, because of her racial awareness, now John's problematic. He doesn't understand my soul. But quite frankly, can anybody ever understand anybody? Regardless of color, regardless of race, regardless of any of that, everybody's experiences are so specific that you are never going to find somebody who understands you on every single level because you're the only one who's ever lived your life. So if you're always needing to find somebody who can be a mirror to you, okay, then just go marry a mirror. Because there's nobody who's going to understand everything about you. And if you go through life being like, I got to pick a partner who totally gets everything about me, you're going to be alone for the rest of your life. Okay, so what really sent her over the edge, though, was that one time John got too close to the street life that she lived. He had dropped her off somewhere where she had to go. He drove this tiny little powder blue VW Beetle. Drops her off in the whitest car possible. And a couple of guys that she knew asked him for a ride. She says, John thought that he could be Mr. United Nations and create a demilitarized zone anywhere he went. He felt comfortable and had no reason to see himself as a possible target. That wasn't going to work with me, especially after the night he dropped me off in his baby blue VW Bug and some dude I knew stepped to him and asked for a ride somewhere with two buddies. Now my question is, why would she let him get used as a ride for these people who apparently she knows, but these two people go on to try to rob John? Okay, so I'm like, sister, what in the world were you thinking? Why weren't you like, hey, John, don't give him a ride. Be on your way, right? But no, she lets them get in the car with him, and then she's shocked that something bad happens. She says that was the night that John almost got killed. In an attempt to set John up and rob him, maybe because they thought John was carrying something for me, these dudes got in the car, pretending they needed a ride to a part of town that he should have never been in. There was quite a saga that followed, but culminated at a red light with guns from another car pointed at John's passengers, who fled on foot. John took off in the nick of time, barely escaping with his life. And the worst part was he wasn't fazed at all. But I was extremely fazed, so much so that I made sure some friends of mine had a word with the dude who started it. John almost got his ass in some shit because of me. Never again. The intersection of our worlds created too much risk. We decided to go our separate ways, but John and I would have a lifelong friendship. Flimsiest reason of all time. Okay, so if you really found somebody that you loved and that totally understood you, that's how you felt about John up until this point. Now suddenly he's not understanding your blackness, and now you've got to let him go because he just doesn't fit in with the gangsta lifestyle. But it's like, if I really cared about somebody, I feel like I would be like, what can I do to make sure this person stays in my life? The drug life and the street life and all of this, if that's posing a threat on if that's posing a threat on this person that I really love so much, maybe I need to question the street life. Maybe that's what I need to drop. Maybe it's not John. Maybe it's the street life I need to drop. And what is this about, like, John was driving into neighborhoods he never had no business driving into? But it's like, but Jada, why do you have a business there? Why do you get to roam from world to world, but there is a wall up where John can't go? Don't you see the inherent unfairness of that statement? Jada thinks that she can go from world to world, if there is such a thing as world to world, if there is such a thing as this world and that world, Jada's not putting up any walls for herself. But there John was standing like a fool over at Odell's, white is white. John can't go into this neighborhood. He got no business going into that neighborhood. Well, why not? This is crazy to me that she would say that this white guy couldn't go places, but she can go everywhere. This is crazy that she'd break up with him because he's white. And because she thinks that because of that, he'll never understand her. This is crazy to me that she would save the drug life, but drop the guy who she said she loved. Insanity. Anyway, now here we come to a whole bunch of the chapter that I'm just going to straight up skip because it's boring. She wants to tell us about every little friend that she ever had back in the day. No, I don't care. I'm sorry. I'm glad you had some girlfriends you could lean on. That's great. But not interested in it. I'm not. Because I don't believe any of the stuff either that she's going to continue to talk about with all the drug life and talk about, this is how we used to move drugs and all this. Yeah, that's what you heard. That's, you watched a couple of episodes of a show and now you know how they move drugs in the streets of Baltimore. Like, just stop it already. Not one of us believes that this is anything legitimate. You heard a couple of people talking and then you wrote it down and acted like it was your life. So I'm not even going to dignify this with a response. She does want to let us know, though, that guy Chet, that she was, the kingpin, that she finally rose up the ranks and got to know him. He worked as a UPS driver on the outside. And she said that he was the most chill guy. Like, you would never have even known that he was moving and shaking like he was behind the scenes. And the only reason I bring him up is that I was real sickened by the fact that she is so taken with him. And even to this day, she's just really taken with the power that he had on the streets. And I'm like, but the most illegitimate power of all time. Okay, how can you, at the age that you're at, as a grown woman, how can you still idolize the power this man had on the streets at the cost it came to your community? She says, at the time, Chet was the only dealer I knew on his level who had an actual job, giving him a legit looking appearance of being the guy next door. He did not carry a tough guy killer persona. I don't think I ever even saw Chet with a gun. Ever. Chet would also be the first millionaire I actually knew. And I circled that because who cares? Who cares if he was a millionaire? He became one through illegitimacy. That's dollars that were bought off the backs of addiction. So what does it matter, right? You want to talk about my people were enslaved all this time. 100% correct. Your people were enslaved in America. And you are continually enslaving people to their addictions by perpetuating and participating in an industry that is killing your community. So why in the world are we supposed to sit back and be like, oh, as white people, we just never understand the plight? John, you should have booted John. He could never understand you. I can never understand why somebody would try to ruin their community to put a couple of bucks in their back pocket just so they could buy a nicer car. And she is perpetuating a new kind of slavery on these people. Addiction of any kind is slavery. And I just can't believe that she would want to cozy up to the people that were running the plantation. But I guess she comforts herself because she says that she and Chet were just high rollers and, they kind of did it Robin Hood style sometimes. They would buy people's groceries at the grocery store if they saw a single mother, an old person. She says Chet and she did it. I believe she did that probably one time. She just has a lot of little tales to tell. Just lots of things that aren't really going to help us understand her better because I don't believe most of them. She ends this chapter by talking about her personal growth. She says that one time she was out with one of her friends and she had to cash a check from a modeling job that she had done. A hair modeling job. It was a $700 check. She'd gone to the liquor store to buy some alcohol. She's like 15, 16. So I'm not really sure how this was going down. But anyway, they don't really care, I guess, in this part of town. She goes to buy some peach schnapps. She tries to cash her check. The guy cashes the check. She goes to put the money in her jacket pocket, and the tall guy behind her reaches over her shoulder, just snatches the money right out of her hand, starts running. She starts running after him, pulls a switchblade out of the back of her pocket, and she's ready to cut him up if need be. Of course, she can't catch him. And the friend she's with is freaking out. And when she finally realizes she can't catch the guy, she staggers back to her friend. Her friend's like, what were you going to do anyway? She's like, I was going to cut that guy's spine out. And her friend's like, well, I guess it's a good thing you weren't able to catch him. Let's just go drink our peach schnapps down by the harbor. So they go. And while they're down there just hanging out, sharing this bottle of peach schnapps, who should she see but the very guy who had robbed her just across the way? She thinks about going up to him and really telling him how it is. But then she thinks better of it. She's like, why bother? She wasn't as angry now as she had been. And she realized, why am I even arguing with this person? I don't need to. I don't need to go after him. I don't need to cut his spine out with my switchblade. I'll just let him have the $700, whatever. And she says that it was this revelation that she felt was a marker of her maturity. There was a time when she would have gotten up and really gone after him, but now she's earned her advanced degree from the University of the Beemore Streets. Oh, and there was one other story before I close this chapter. Tupac's gone. Despite the fact that she says that they were thicker than thieves and, you could never pull the two of them apart, Tupac one day just left a note in her locker and said he'd moved to California. Finances and his life and his personal life is a mess. And he hadn't bothered to reveal any of this to her. But he's decided that he just can't stay at the School of Performing Arts anymore, and he has to go, and he's decided to try to go to California and figure out a life for himself there. And she said that he left her addresses and phone numbers so that she could get in touch with him. So they called each other on the phone. They wrote letters back and forth. It was always him ending every conversation with, stay in line, Jada. I don't have to come and get on a bus and straighten you out. And all this. And so she said that there was always this sense, even though they were so far apart, that he always had her back, even though he was really distant from her physically. I find it incredibly strange that your best friend wouldn't tell you they were moving completely across the country. And your best friend who you say told you everything didn't bother to tell you that things had gotten to be such a mess that he was looking for alternatives for his schooling and for his career. Those don't sound like the actions of any best friend I've ever had. So I feel like this might be the crack in the story of how close they were. That is wild to me. Anyway, who can know? Who can know? I wasn't there, but I have to say I'm shocked and surprised. I'm also hoping the next chapter is less arduous to get through. It was boring. Painful. I skipped so much stuff. So hit the high notes, friends. And if you ask me, there were still some pretty low notes. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.